Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' administration is under fire from fellow Republicans in Florida regarding a $10 million payment that was made to a charity that is very closely associated with his wife. That contractor owed $67 million to the state of Florida. They were able to resolve this payment by sending only $57 million back to state coffers and then $10 million to an entity called Hope Florida. Again, that is the Casey DeSantis-aligned entity. Republican Representative Alex Andrade exposed this bizarre payment in a hearing this week.
How did $10 million walk from ACA's bank account to Hope Florida's DSO last October?
Those funds were never given to the state. They were a direct contribution made from Centene to the foundation.
So you're telling me that there was a settlement with Centene where ACA required Centene to make a separate payment outside of our accounting processes as part of a settlement with the state to this DSO?
First, I'm not an attorney, and I was not a part of the settlement discussions. However, I know a lot of lawyers were involved in the drafting of the settlement agreement, and I have to believe that all T's were crossed, I's dotted, to ensure the authority was there.
Who were those lawyers? What was their basis for saying that sending money outside of the legislative process to a charity aligned with your wife was okay instead of fully reimbursing the taxpayers? They might not have been good lawyers because the law is fairly clear on this point. Florida Statute 45.062 sub 5 reads in part, quote, when a state agency settles an action or legal claim, all monies paid to the state by a party shall be placed into the general revenue fund or the appropriate trust fund. That is not Hope Florida. Now, the argument we've heard for people associated with DeSantis' camp say that, well, those monies were never really paid to the state. They went around the state. There's no limiting principle on that. If that was legal, then it would be totally legal for the state to say, well, you HMO screwed the taxpayer, so instead of paying the taxpayer everything you owe them, give $10 million to my neighbor Phil. Chairman Andrade committed exclusively on our program to hold additional hearings and issue subpoenas if necessary.
I intend to invite representatives from the Hope Florida DSO and from the Department of Children and Families that created this DSO to my committee next week to ask those questions. I hope they show up. If they don't, then yeah, I think I would have to go issue those subpoenas to get these answers.
The first thing Chairman Andrade should subpoena are the bank records of Hope Florida to see how this $10 million was ultimately spent. We have new reporting that may shed light on how some of these funds were used, and they could have been used on political ads. This is a portion of the minutes from a Hope Florida board meeting where they discussed a grant, a partnership between Hope Florida and an entity controlled by an advocacy group, the Florida Chamber of Commerce. The Florida Chamber of Commerce lobbies the Florida legislature and Florida governor. They set up an entity, or were involved in an entity, called Securing Florida's Future, which apparently was tasked with, quote, enhancing awareness and, quote, a data-driven approach. It got us thinking, enhance awareness. About what exactly? Medicaid? No. Actually, Securing Florida's Future was a political entity running paid political ads, not about Medicaid, but about marijuana.
This amendment provides no meaningful restrictions on when, where, or how marijuana can be used. That means effectively unrestricted marijuana use anytime, anywhere, and by any method.
Florida voters, through petition, put a marijuana adult use question on the ballot. I opposed that amendment, as did Governor DeSantis. President Trump actually supported it. Regardless of how you feel about marijuana, should ads for a political persuasion campaign be paid for from funds that should otherwise provide health care to poor people? That ad you just saw was from the Florida Chamber of Commerce CEO, and it had this disclaimer on it, quote, paid political advertisement paid for by Secure Florida's Future, Inc. The exact entity that was discussing a grant with Hope Florida after Hope Florida got $10 million that should have been returned to the taxpayers. Now, we have invited Governor DeSantis, First Lady DeSantis, any of their agency heads, any member of their administration to come on and explain this and explain their position. They instead threatened our network with baseless defamation claims and haven't been able to identify anything we've said that's been incorrect. And certainly, if we're wrong about something, we'll be happy to address it with you, the audience. Joining us now is Florida House Speaker Danny Perez. Speaker Perez, thanks for joining me. What do you know about this $10 million that should have come to state coffers and instead went to Hope, Florida?
Well, thanks for having me, Matt. And look, what we know is what's been shed in public, started by Chair Andrade in his committee last week. But we do know that there were $10 million that should have gone back to the state treasury in a settlement agreement between Centene and ACA, which is an agency of the state of Florida. And instead it went to Hope, Florida. And it did so in the dark of night. And that's really where the frustration comes from, Matt. No one is negating the pure intent and the work of Hope, Florida. Not one person. We have heard the stories. We've heard the testimony. I understand it's helping people. It's helping Floridians with loaned employees from agencies to kind of do the job that agencies should have been doing themselves, but have failed to do, which is help Floridians. And so now we have a third party that is the middle person between Floridians and agencies in order to hopefully provide the service to Floridians that the agency should have done from the beginning. That being said, Hope, Florida received this $10 million. And then where it went from there is the question. Another question, Matt, that I think is important for us to ask is how much of this money should have gone to the federal government. This is a Medicaid program. These are Medicaid dollars. And how was that response and how is that response going to be answered? That question going to be answered by the governor's office? I don't have that answer. And all we're asking for here is transparency and accountability. And it's shocking to me that Governor Ron DeSantis, who I've considered a friend and who I've endorsed for president in years past, that he is trying to shy away from transparency and accountability. All we're asking for is the answers that have been asked by members of the Florida House in their right, and we haven't gotten those answers.
And if you don't get them, Mr. Speaker, will you authorize Chairman Andrade to issue subpoenas for the bank records of Hope, Florida?
All options are on the table, including subpoenas, but we hope that we never get there. We consider the governor a partner. He is a co-equal branch of government. But if we don't get our answers, I mean, we have a job to do. We're elected officials that have a job to do, which is get answers for the people. And we need to know where these dollars have gone. These are dollars that were Medicaid dollars. Should have gone back to the state treasury and eventually into the budget through the legislative process. And that's not something that was done.
Mr. Speaker, are you concerned that these dollars were used to fund ads against Amendment 3 regarding marijuana in Florida?
Well, that's a possibility, but we don't know the answer to that. That's part of what we're trying to find out. We know that there were two different $5 million checks sent through 501c4s for political purposes, and how that was dispersed, whether it was through a 501c4 or through a PAC. Those are questions that we have. We don't have the answers to them, but I think Floridians should know. And by the way, Matt, similar to you, I opposed Amendment 3. I opposed Amendment 4. I'm glad we defeated it. No one is negating the fight against Amendment 3. I applaud the governor for being one of the leaders of that charge. All I'm asking for is transparency on how the money got to that final point without going through the proper
and as you and I
protocol,
both know, Mr. Speaker,
which is
yes,
back
Mr.
to the
Speaker,
state government.
as we know, if you use improper means to achieve what you believe is a just result, the other side can do that too, and they could raid state money for their favorite purposes. So I applaud your appeal for transparency. I do want to pull up this October 13th letter. This is from the CEO of the Florida Chamber, Mr. Wilson, and to Mark Wilson, and it is to the chairman of Hope, Florida, Mr. Joshua Hay. And we should note Joshua Hay is the chairman of Hope, Florida. And in this letter, there's a request for $5 million to this particular entity called Secure Florida's Future. Do you know what this Secure Florida's Future entity is, Mr. Speaker?
We don't. The only thing we do know is that Mark is the chairman and CEO of the Florida Chamber, and the Florida Chamber later had commercials against Amendment 3. But we don't know the answer definitively, but the breadcrumbs are there. And I think that's what the committee process is going to be for next week. Chair Andrade.
Yeah, hold on. Let me just walk you through a few of the breadcrumbs we found, because pull up the notation for Keep Florida Clean. We found this in our records as well. Keep Florida Clean is a political committee, and the chairperson is James Uthmeyer, who is the current Attorney General of Florida and previously, at the time of the execution of these agreements, was the chief of staff to the governor. And then go to the next graphic, team. Here, you've got the records, the financial records from Keep Florida Clean, and look at this. Millions of dollars coming into that from Secure Florida's Future. So if Secure Florida's Future is getting money from Hope Florida, and then in turn providing that money to a political committee run by the now Attorney General. Like, what confidence can Floridians have that the current administration can get to the bottom of whether or not this money was used for political ads?
At a bare minimum, the questions have to be asked, and I would hope that they would eventually be answered. I think all this could be put to bed if the answers were actually given. The problem is, since we're not receiving any answers, the digging continues. And the digging isn't just continuing on behalf of the House, it's continuing on behalf of the media as well. I think people are interested in knowing where the money went, how it got there, why it got there, and how it was used. Those are pretty simple questions that we still don't have answers to.
Sure, and I don't want this to all be about Hope Florida. You're in the middle of a really productive legislative session. Mr. Speaker, how can Floridians expect the work that you and Senate President Al Britton and Governor DeSantis are doing right now going to affect their lives going forward?
Matt, what I can tell you is on behalf of the House, we have proposed a budget that is lower than last year's budget. That hasn't happened since the recession. We have proposed a $5 billion tax cut, has never happened in the history of the state of Florida. And we have cut 0.75% of the sales tax, which has never happened in the history of the United States. The House, as you know, as a former member of the House, a proud former member of the House is where conservative lies. And we are having the most conservative year that the Florida House has ever seen. We're very proud of it. The membership is proud of it. And we're still not done. We have several weeks to go, and I look forward to doing so alongside Senate President Al Britton and the governor.
No, we wish you well. Florida, for all of our criticisms, and we have to criticize our friends and our enemies alike when they're wrong, Florida is doing a great job. Governor DeSantis has been a great leader for the state. You and Senate President Al Britton have been great team members to advance conservative policy, and we wish you well in the final weeks of your legislative session, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Matt.